In the 8th episode of the very first season of Adventure Time, Finn and Jake find a chunk of ice floating in a lake. Inside the ice are 5 middle-aged men in suits, frozen, preserved for 1,000 years. The episode is a goof. The men are a punchline. The whole thing is 11 minutes of jokes about office workers being bad at adventures. And then the episode ends, and the writers in the room look at what they have just made, and one of them says something out loud that quietly changes everything about what Adventure Time would become.
That single conversation, in 2010, in a small meeting room at Cartoon Network Studios, is the reason a children's cartoon about a boy in a bear hat ended up being one of the most quietly devastating pieces of television ever made. Welcome to Jakku. Let's get started. The pilot that wasn't supposed to mean anything. Before Adventure Time was a show about loss. Before it was a show about dementia. Before it was a show about a 1,000-year-old vampire singing to her dying father figure who can no longer remember her name. It was something much smaller. It was a 7-minute short film that a young animator named Pendleton Ward put together in 2006, hoping someone would let him make a real cartoon out of it. The short is still around if anyone wants to find it. Finn was named Penn back then, after the creator himself, which Ward later changed because he didn't want to see his own name printed on the back of sweatpants. Jake was there. There was a princess to save, an evil ice wizard, a boy and his dog running through a colorful world saying funny things and hitting things with a sword. That was the whole pitch. That was the whole vision. There was no mushroom war. There was no Simon Petrikov. There was no 1,000-year-old grief sitting underneath the Candy Kingdom. There was just a kid and his dog and a place where they could go on adventures. The thing that gets lost when people talk about Adventure Time now, when they talk about how the show made them cry, when they share screenshots of Marceline holding Simon's hand and pretend they aren't tearing up at their desks, is that none of that was the plan. The depth was not designed. The depth was found. Ward grew up in San Antonio, Texas, the youngest of 3 brothers. His mother, Betty, was an artist who knew people in the animation business, and Ward started drawing flip books in 1st grade. He went to Cal Arts, the famous animation school in California, where he became friends with 2 other students who would go on to make their own beloved cartoons, J.G. Quintel, who created Regular Show, and Alex Hirsch, who created Gravity Falls. The 3 of them were part of a small group of young animators who were about to quietly change what cartoons could be. When Ward was still at Cal Arts, Nickelodeon came to the school and asked the students to pitch them 1-minute shorts. Ward tried out an early version of Adventure Time. The executives didn't buy it. They didn't even give him feedback on it. He went home and waited. After he graduated, he heard about a small studio called Frederator that was running a program called Random Cartoons, where they let new animators come in and pitch them ideas, regardless of whether they had any experience. Ward took his shot. He made the 7-minute short. It got picked up. It went on television briefly as part of the Random Cartoons program in 2007, and then someone uploaded it to YouTube, and then everything changed. The short went viral. By November of 2007, it had over 1 million views, which was a serious number back then. People were sharing it, posting it on forums, talking about how strange and charming it was. There was something about the way it looked, something about the casual rhythm of the way Finn and Jake talked to each other that felt different from other cartoons. It looked like a kid's show on the surface, with simple round shapes and bright colors, but there was something underneath that was harder to name. Adults who watched it ended up sending it to other adults. Kids loved it because it was a kid's show. The strange thing was that grown-ups loved it too, and nobody could quite explain why. Frederator and Ward started shopping it around to networks. The first stop was Nickelodeon, the same network that had passed on the original Cal Arts pitch. They passed again. This time, they were given a real chance to pick up Adventure Time as a full series, and instead, they chose a different show called Fanboy and Chum Chum. Ward kept moving. He kept pitching. He spent the next 2 or 3 years in a kind of professional limbo, working as a storyboard artist on a show called The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, while waiting for someone to take a chance on his idea. Flapjack, as it turned out, was where Adventure Time was going to learn how to be made. Flapjack was a storyboard-driven show, which meant that the storyboard artists were also the writers. They were given rough outlines and trusted to figure out the actual content of each episode themselves. Ward worked on Flapjack alongside other young animators who would later work on Adventure Time, and the experience taught him a different way of making cartoons. Most shows had writers in one room and artists in another. Flapjack threw them together and let the people who were drawing the show also decide what it was about. Ward absorbed this. He took it with him. Eventually, Cartoon Network said yes. They picked up Adventure Time for a full series in 2008. It took until April 2010 for the show to actually premiere on television, and during those years between the green light and the premiere, Ward had to take that loose, weird, charming little short and figure out how to turn it into something that could run for years. He made what is called a series Bible, a document that lays out the world of the show, the characters, what they want, where they live, what kind of stories are possible. The original pitch Bible Ward submitted to Cartoon Network in 2008 still exists. People can read it online if they look. Going back to it now is one of the strangest experiences a fan of the show can have
have because the document is so much smaller than what the show became. The land of Ooo is described as magical. That's the word, magical. There is no mention of a nuclear war. There is no mention of buried cities or radiation poisoning or a man losing his mind to a magical crown. The princesses are princesses. The wizards are wizards. The world is, in Ward's own words from those early years, just a fun place where stuff happens. In an interview with the website Art of the Title not long after the show premiered, Ward described the moment Adventure Time was created. He was on a family vacation. He had been sketching a lot, looking for ideas, and he saw two characters in his notebook just sitting there, a kid in a bear hat and his bulldog, riding on a boat, and he started building a world around them, stream of consciousness, drawing whatever felt funny. That was the beginning. A boy and his dog, a magical world, a princess to save. Other ideas he thought were funny. The whole thing came together in a sketchbook on a beach somewhere, with no plan and no thesis, and no plan to make anyone cry one day. When Cartoon Network picked the show up, Ward made two versions of the Bible to flesh things out further. He added a few new characters. One of them was Marceline the Vampire Queen, who he added specifically to give the show a way to be a little scarier when it needed to be. That is the original purpose of Marceline. She was a tool. She was a way to bring some shadow into a show that was mostly sunlight. Nobody knew yet that she was 1,000 years old. Nobody knew yet about her father, or her stuffed rabbit, or the song about how everything stays. They didn't know any of that, because none of that had been thought of. She was just the show's vampire, brought in to handle the spooky episodes when Ward wanted some variety. This is the part that most people skip over when they talk about why Adventure Time is the way it is. They go straight to Simon. They go straight to the Ice King's notes, to Marceline reading them back through tears, to the song that ends with the line about losing yourself and being afraid of losing the person you love too. They go to the famous moments. And the famous moments are real, and they earned every bit of the love they get. But the truth about how those moments came to exist is stranger and quieter than the version most fans tell themselves. The truth is that Adventure Time was built by a young man in his mid-20s who liked Dungeons and Dragons, who liked fart jokes that were carefully constructed, who admired the films of Hayao Miyazaki, who watched home movies and Dr. Katz, and wanted his show to feel like a relaxed conversation between friends. Ward has said in interviews that one of his guiding instincts for Adventure Time was Miyazaki's My Neighbor Totoro, a film he loved for its quiet beauty, for the way it gave its young characters real feelings without making a big show of it. He wanted a cartoon that was funny first and beautiful second. He didn't talk about wanting it to be heavy. He didn't talk about wanting it to be sad. The word he kept coming back to in early interviews was cute. He wanted it to be cute and funny and a little weird. The pilot reflects this exactly. Watching the original short now, after knowing everything that came after, is a small kind of heartbreak in itself. There is no weight in the short. There is just a boy and his dog on a goofy little quest, doing some funny voices, hitting an ice wizard with a sword. The colors are simpler. The drawings are looser. The whole thing has a kind of lightness to it that the show, eventually, would lose on purpose. The Adventure Time that lives in the cultural memory now, the one with the post-apocalyptic backstory, the dementia metaphors, the long-running love story between two queer women, the meditation on what it means to be alive. None of that exists in the 7 minutes that started it all. There is a reason this matters, and the reason is the central one for understanding the show. Most cartoons that become deep were planned to be deep. Their creators sat down and said, this is going to be the show that finally treats kids like they are smart enough to handle real feelings. They built worlds with mythologies in mind from day one. They came in with a thesis. They came in with the answer. Adventure Time did not do that. Adventure Time arrived as a goofy little adventure cartoon and slowly, almost accidentally, found out what it actually was over the course of years, episode by episode, decision by decision, with hundreds of different artists pushing it in directions that nobody had planned. The depth in Adventure Time was discovered. It was uncovered. It came out of the show the way a buried object comes out of the ground when you keep brushing the dirt away. And the people brushing the dirt were often surprised by what they were finding. Ward himself has been remarkably honest about this in his interviews. He has never claimed to have a master plan. He has talked about being so pressed for time in the early years that he had to write episode songs while driving to the office, talking out loud to himself in the car with the radio off, pitching jokes to nobody. He has talked about the show feeling, by the middle of its run, like a shorts program for the storyboard artists and writers, where each of them got to make whatever they wanted to make. He has said that what excited him most about Adventure Time was being in a position to give people the same kind of weird, funny, surprising thing that shows like The Simpsons gave him when he was a kid. That is not the language of a man who set out to make a show that would teach a generation how to grieve. That is the language of a man who set out to make a fun cartoon and then watched, mostly delighted, as it became something more. The story of how Adventure Time became so deep is, on one level, the story of how this small, casual, charming little show, built around a boy and his dog and a princess to save, kept being handed to people who took it more seriously than the original concept ever asked them to. Rebecca Sugar took took it more seriously. Tom Herpich took it more seriously. Adam Mudo, who would eventually take over as showrunner when Ward stepped back during season 5, took it more seriously. The composer Tim Kiefer took it more seriously. The voice actors, especially Tom Kenny and Olivia Olson, took it more seriously. The depth came in through the cracks. The depth came in through the people. The pilot had no apocalypse and no dying scientist, and no songs about everything staying even as everything changes, because none of that was needed yet. Those things came later. They came when the people making the show realized, slowly, that the show would let them put those things in. The first piece of the puzzle, then, is this. Adventure Time started as a fun little cartoon. The viral short, the original Bible, the early sketches, the early interviews, all of them point in the same direction. The show was meant to be cute. It was meant to be a hangout. It was meant to be a place where Finn and Jake went on adventures and made jokes and saved princesses.
And nobody who made it was thinking about what would happen 10 years later, when grown adults would be quoting its songs at funerals. Knowing this is the key to understanding everything that came after. Because when something accidental becomes important, the question is always how. How does an accident turn into one of the most emotionally precise pieces of animated television ever made? How does a show that started without a plan end up with a plan so layered that academics have written papers about it? The answer is in the choices the show made over the next 8 years. And the answer is in the people who made those choices. And the answer is in the small moments where the show looked at itself and decided, almost without anyone in charge noticing, to become something larger. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The first of those moments came in the 8th episode of the first season. There was an iceberg. There were some businessmen frozen inside it. Nobody on the writing team had thought too hard about why those businessmen were there, or what their being frozen meant. And then, in a small writer's room conversation that Pendleton Ward has talked about openly in interviews since, the team made a choice that would change the entire shape of the show. They looked at the businessmen in the iceberg, and they decided what the world really was. Section 2. The iceberg in business time. The accident that made the world post-apocalyptic. The 8th episode of Season 1 aired on April 26, 2010. It was called Business Time. The pitch for it was about as silly as Adventure Time pitches got in those early days. Finn and Jake go for a swim. They find a chunk of ice floating in the lake. Inside the ice are 5 middle-aged men in suits, frozen solid, looking exactly the way you might imagine if someone froze a small accounting department 1,000 years ago and then forgot about them. Finn and Jake take the iceberg home, defrost the businessmen, and then watch as these strange, nervous, cheerfully overqualified suit-wearing creatures take over Finn and Jake's life by handling all of their adventures for them. The episode ends in chaos. Everybody learns a lesson about doing your own work. Roll credits. On paper, the episode is a goof. It is a one-joke premise stretched to 11 minutes. The humor is in watching grown men in office attire try to fight monsters with the same quiet, professional energy they would bring to a quarterly review. The jokes about the businessmen forgetting things, about them being unable to remember what business they actually used to do, about them crying softly when Jake asks them basic questions, are written for laughs. None of it was meant to be heavy. None of it was meant to mean anything beyond what was on the screen. And then the show ended, and the writers in the room looked at what they had just put on television, and one of them said something out loud that quietly changed everything. The story of what happened next has been told by Pendleton Ward himself, in his own words, in interviews that anyone can still find. He told it most clearly in a conversation with the website Pop Candy, where he was asked how the post-apocalyptic part of Adventure Time came to be. His answer was simple. It was not in the original concept. It emerged from this episode. The writers looked at the businessmen frozen in the ice and decided that the only way that made sense was if the world was post-apocalyptic. And they, in his exact phrasing, just ran with it. This is one of the most quietly important moments in modern animation history, and almost nobody talks about it. Think about what was actually happening in that writer's room. The show had aired 8 episodes. It had been on television for less than a month. It was already doing well, already pulling in the kind of viewership that meant Cartoon Network was happy. The team could have simply continued with the plan they had. A fun, magical land, a boy and his dog, princesses to save, weirdness for the sake of weirdness. Nobody was asking them to make the world bigger. Nobody was asking them to add a 1,000-year-old nuclear war to a children's cartoon about a kid in a bear hat. Instead, they took an accident, a goofy episode about frozen businessmen, and they turned it into a foundation. They looked at those men in their suits, encased in ancient ice, unable to remember what they used to do, and they asked themselves what kind of world that scene actually existed in. The answer they came up with was a world where there had been an apocalypse. A world where the things that look familiar in the background of every episode, the buried cars, the broken highways, the rusted machines half swallowed by the dirt, are familiar because they used to be ours. The land of Ooo, they decided in that meeting, was Earth. It was just Earth 1,000 years after something terrible had happened to it. Ward later named that something. He called it the Great Mushroom
Mushroom War, the name being a reference to the mushroom cloud shape of a nuclear explosion. He summarized the show, in another interview, as taking place after the bombs have fallen and magic has come back into the world. That is the entire premise of every episode of Adventure Time, hiding in a single sentence. After the bombs, magic returned. Everything you see is what came after. This is the moment Adventure Time became deep. Not the moment it earned the reputation. Not the moment audiences noticed. The moment it actually happened.
April 2010. 8 episodes into a show nobody had high expectations for. In a meeting room at Cartoon Network Studios, with a group of young animators looking at a frozen office worker on a screen and deciding, almost casually, that they were going to build a tragedy underneath their cartoon. What is remarkable about this choice, and what makes it so worth thinking about, is that the team made a follow-up choice that was even more important. They decided not to lean on it. They decided not to make the show be about the apocalypse. Ward has been very clear about this in interviews. He has said the post-apocalyptic part of Ooh was meant to be background. He used a specific phrase. He said he never wanted the Mushroom War to be hit over the head in the show. He limited it, in his words, to cars buried underground and other small touches that did not raise any eyebrows. The plan, once the apocalypse was decided on, was to keep it quiet. Keep it in the dirt. Keep it in the corners of the frame. Let it be there for the people who looked, and let it stay invisible for the people who didn't. This is the part that gets called craft. This is the part that separates Adventure Time from every other cartoon that ever tried to be deep. Most shows that have a heavy backstory cannot stop themselves from using it. They put exposition in every episode. They have characters explain the world to each other. They cut to flashbacks every time something serious comes up. Adventure Time did the opposite. It hid its weight. It buried it the way the world had been buried. Watch any episode of Adventure Time, especially the early ones, and start paying attention to the backgrounds. The art team, led by background designer Ghost Shrimp during the first 4 seasons, layered the apocalypse into nearly every shot. There are cars in the dirt. There are road signs sticking out of grass. There are highways that lead nowhere. There are pieces of broken concrete. There are bits of rusted metal, half recognizable as machines from before. None of it is pointed at. None of it is announced. It just sits there. The world tells the audience what happened by showing them, quietly, what was left behind. A child watching the show sees none of this. A child watching the show sees a magical land full of candy people and ice wizards and talking dogs. The buried car in the corner of the screen is just part of the scenery. The half-collapsed building in the distance is just an interesting shape. Ooh is a fun place. Ooh is where the adventures happen. The dirt is just dirt. An adult watching the same scene sees something completely different. An adult sees a car. An adult sees a parking lot. An adult sees a school bus, half sunk into the earth, with grass growing through the empty windows. An adult understands immediately and quietly that Ooh is built on top of a graveyard, that every adventure Finn and Jake go on takes place over the bones of a civilization that died screaming. The same image, depending on who is watching, either means nothing or means everything. This is what Adventure Time figured out in that writer's room after business time. It figured out that you could have both shows at the same time. You could have the cartoon for the kids and the tragedy for the adults, and they could share the exact same frames, and neither audience would have to be told anything. The kids would get their adventure. The adults would get their grief. Nobody would have to choose. That choice, to discover the apocalypse and then refuse to lecture about it, is the choice that made everything else in the show possible. Without that decision, Simon Petrikov is just a quirky old wizard. With that decision, he is a survivor of a nuclear war who lost his fiancée and adopted a child and slowly went mad protecting her. Without that decision, Marceline is just the show's spooky character. With that decision, she is one of a small handful of people on the entire planet who actually remember what was lost. Without that decision, the buried businessmen are a one-off joke. With that decision, they are 5 men who went to work one day and never came home, frozen mid-sentence, defrosted into a world that no longer has any use for them. The choice was small at the time. It was made fast. The team probably did not understand in the moment just how much they were locking in. But the rest of the show, all 8 years and 10 seasons of it, builds on that single conversation about a single iceberg in a single goofy episode. Every emotional moment that came later, every scene that made people cry, every song that became a meme, that became a tattoo, that became the thing people quote at the funerals of people they loved. Every one of those moments rests on the foundation that was poured in that meeting. The way the team built on it from there is what makes the show feel earned. The Mushroom War never gets a single big reveal episode. There is no flashback that explains the whole thing. There is no character who sits the audience down and says, "Here is what happened." The story of the war is told in pieces, scattered across the show's run, dropped into episodes that often have nothing else to do with it. In the 3rd season, an episode called Holly Jolly Secrets shows a few seconds of footage from before the war, a video diary made by a man named Simon Petrikov, with a plane visible outside his apartment window, a hint, dropped without comment, that the war had already begun, and Simon did not yet know. In the 4th season,
season, an episode called I Remember You confirms that Simon survived the war and met a young Marceline shortly after. In the 5th season, an episode called Simon and Marcy shows their long walk through the ruins of a destroyed city, with Simon trying to find chicken soup for a sick child while monsters chase them through the rubble. In the 6th season, an episode called The Vault shows the inside of a fallout shelter where the people inside did not survive. In the 8th season, an episode called Preboot shows what looks like a normal modern living room, with a smartphone on the table in the moments before everything ended. None of these episodes ever stop and explain. None of them announce themselves as Mushroom War episodes. They are just episodes, going about their stories, with the background of the apocalypse showing through in pieces. A plane outside a window, a note left in a shelter, a theme song from a 1980s sitcom that one of the survivors keeps singing to himself because it is one of the few things he can still remember about who he was. The audience builds the picture themselves, slowly, across hundreds of episodes, the way archaeologists build a picture of a lost civilization from broken pottery and old foundations. The one question that remains about all this is when, exactly, the war happened. The show never gives a specific year. The clues, scattered across the series, suggest it happened sometime after the late 20th century, possibly in the early 21st. There is a Generation 3 iMac computer visible in one episode, a model that was first sold to the public in 1998. There is a smartphone visible in another flashback. The show is suggesting, gently and without ever saying it directly, that the world that ended was a world very much like ours. The cars buried in the dirt are cars that audiences would recognize. The highways are highways the audience drives on. The school bus half sunk in the grass is a school bus the audience went to school in. The Mushroom War, in other words, is not just an apocalypse. It is the apocalypse the audience already worries about. It is the nuclear war that has been hovering over the world since 1945. The war everyone has spent 80 years quietly hoping never happens. The war that filled American imaginations through the Cold War and into the present day. Adventure Time placed its candy kingdoms and its talking dogs on top of the ash of the war that haunts everyone watching. And then it refused to talk about it directly. And then it asked its audience to feel something. This is what Pendleton Ward and his team chose in that meeting after Business Time aired, when they decided to just run with it. They chose to build a show on top of the audience's deepest cultural fear, and then they chose to do it so quietly that most viewers would not even notice they had done it. The choice, once it was made, opened a door. The door led to characters who could carry the weight of the war on their backs without ever having to mention it. The door led to backstories that explained why certain people were the way they were. The door led to flashbacks, and to songs, and to small, devastating scenes of two people sitting in the rubble of a dead world trying to make each other feel safe. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The first person to walk through that door was a kind, intelligent, slightly nervous man with glasses who bought a strange-looking crown from a sailor in Scandinavia, and who, the moment he put it on his head, started to forget who he was. The show had not introduced him yet. The audience had only met the cackling, princess-stealing wizard he eventually became. But the door was now open, and the man behind it was waiting, and the writers were going to find him soon. Section 3. The storyboard-driven engine. Why Adventure Time could get weirder than it was allowed to be. There is a question that comes up over and over in Adventure Time forums, in fan essays, in long Reddit threads where people try to work out why the show feels the way it feels. The question is simple. How did one cartoon manage to be so many different things at once? How could the same series air an episode about Jake teaching a baby to do business in the morning, and an episode about a man losing his entire memory of the woman he loved in the evening? How could it be a fart joke, and a dementia metaphor, and a love story, and a war epic, and a lullaby, and a slapstick comedy, sometimes in the span of a single afternoon? The answer is not magic, and the answer is not luck. The answer is a specific choice that Cartoon Network made about how the show would be made, and that choice, once it was in place, allowed the show to become something that no other cartoon at the time could have become. To explain it, the conversation has to go back a few steps, to a show called The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack. Flapjack ran on Cartoon Network from 2008 to 2010. It was created by an animator named Thurop Van Orman, and it was strange in ways that mattered. Most cartoons at the time were made the way live-action shows were made. There would be a writer's room full of writers, and the writers would write a full script, with every line of dialogue and every action carefully spelled out, and then the script would get handed to an animation team, and the animation team would draw what the writers told them to draw. The writers wrote, the artists drew. The two jobs were separate. Flapjack threw that out. Flapjack ran on a different system called storyboard-driven production. In a storyboard-driven show, there is no full script. There is only a rough outline, a few pages of notes describing what the episode is generally about, what beats need to happen, what jokes might land. The outline gets handed to a pair of storyboard artists. Those storyboard artists, working together, then sit down and draw the entire episode themselves. They decide what happens in each scene. They decide what the characters say. They decide how the jokes folks work. They write and they draw, both at once. Because in this system, the writing and the drawing are the same job. This sounds like a small technical thing, but it changes everything about a show. In the old system, the writers came up with the ideas and the artists carried them out. In the storyboard-driven system, the artists are the ones coming up with the ideas. The people drawing the show are also the people deciding what the show is about. And because storyboard artists tend to be young, often very young, often fresh out of CalArts or the Rhode Island School of Design, or whatever animation program they came from, the storyboard-driven model had an unusual side effect. It put the creative center of the show in the hands of people in their 20s, working in pairs, drawing whatever felt right to them in a given week. Pendleton Ward worked on Flapjack as a storyboard artist before Adventure Time was picked up. J.G. Quintel, who would go on to make regular show, also worked on Flapjack. Alex Hirsch, who would later create Gravity Falls, also worked there. The studio at that moment was a small ecosystem of young animators learning a new way of making cartoons. And when those animators started making their own shows, they brought the storyboard-driven system with them. Adventure Time inherited it directly. Regular Show inherited it. Gravity Falls inherited it. Steven Universe inherited it from Adventure Time, when one of those storyboard artists eventually got her own show. The whole next generation of beloved Cartoon Network programming came out of this single production model, passed from one show to the next like a recipe. For Adventure Time, the model meant something specific. Each episode was assigned to a pair of storyboard artists. The pair would get a one-page outline that gave them the basic shape of the episode. Finn and Jake meet a stranger. The stranger is hiding a secret. Things go sideways. Lessons are learned. Episode ends. The outline might have a few specific beats that needed to happen for plot reasons. It might have a few jokes the writers had already come up with, but the actual content of the episode, the actual feel of it, was up to the two artists working on it. This is why Adventure Time has the texture it has. Different artists made different episodes, and each pair brought their own taste, their own sense of humor, their own emotional instincts. An episode written and drawn by Tom Herpich and Steve Wolfhard would have a certain unsettling quality to it, a willingness to sit in strangeness and discomfort. An episode written and drawn by Rebecca Sugar and Adam Muto would have a softness to it, a quiet attention to the small ways people hurt each other and forgive each other. An episode written and drawn by Cole Sanchez and Rebecca Sugar might suddenly contain a song that nobody had asked for, a song that would later end up being the most famous moment in the entire series. The show contained all of these voices because the production model required it to. There was no single writer enforcing a single tone. There were dozens of artists, working in pairs, each given the keys to a few episodes a season and trusted to make something good. The list of people who came up through the Adventure Time storyboard system reads, in retrospect, like a list of the most important young animators of the 2000s. Rebecca Sugar, who wrote and drew episodes including Simon and Marcy, and It Came from the Nightosphere before leaving to create Steven Universe, the show that opened the door to widely seen queer relationships in children's cartoons. Tom Herpich, who would win a Primetime Emmy in 2016 for his work on the Stakes finale. Adam Muto, who started as a storyboard artist and eventually took over as showrunner when Ward stepped back. Patrick McHale, who worked on the show before going on to create Over the Garden Wall. Pete Braungart, who later created Uncle Grandpa and the new Looney Tunes cartoons. Skylar Page, who created Clarence. Julia Pott, who created Summer Camp Island. Elizabeth Ito, who created City of Ghosts for Netflix. Ian Jones-Cordy, who would marry Rebecca Sugar and go on to create OKKO Let's Be Heroes. Every one of these creators got their training, in part, by being handed an outline of an Adventure Time episode and being told to make something out of it. The show was not just a show, it was a school. It was a generation of animation talent figuring out who they were going to be by working on a cartoon about a boy and his dog. This matters because of what it means for the question of how the show became deep. The depth in Adventure Time is not the work of a single person. It is the cumulative result of dozens of young artists, each given small windows of authority, each pushing the show in slightly different directions, each finding out what the show would let them get away with. When Rebecca Sugar wrote Simon and Marcy, the heartbreaking flashback episode about Simon trying to keep a sick young Marceline alive in a destroyed city while singing the theme song to the sitcom Cheers to keep his own mind from breaking, she was not following a master plan. She was using her assigned episode to make something she personally cared about. The show let her. The system let her. The next pair of artists used their own episode to make something completely different, and the show let them too. Pendleton Ward has talked about this directly. In an interview with the AV Club in 2012, he said the show by then felt like a shorts program for the storyboard artists and writers, where everyone got to make whatever they wanted. He has said this is what excited him about Adventure Time. It was the part he loved most. The fact that he was no longer the single voice driving everything. The fact that the show contained dozens of voices instead of one was a feature for him. It was the point. This is also why Ward, sometime during the production of the 5th season, was able to step back from being showrunner and hand the position to Adam Muto. Ward has said in interviews that the job was was driving him nuts and was negatively affecting his quality of life. The pressure of running a show that had become a cultural event, while also voicing characters and writing songs in his car on the way to the office, finally became too much. He stepped down. The show kept going. It kept getting better. The fact that it kept getting better, that it did not collapse without its creator at the helm, is the clearest possible proof that Adventure Time was never really one person's vision. It was a group's vision. It was an ecosystem. Muto took over, and the show entered what many fans consider its richest period. The Stakes miniseries, the Islands miniseries, the Elements miniseries, the slow, careful unfolding of the Ice King's tragedy, the Bubblegum and Marceline relationship, all of it happened under Muto's watch, with Ward's blessing, with the storyboard system continuing to do its work in the background. Different artists kept making different episodes. The show kept being 100 shows at once. The depth kept getting deeper because the system kept allowing more artists to bring more of themselves to the work. There is one more piece to all this that needs to be named, and it is the piece that almost nobody outside the industry knows about. Cartoon Network, in the early years of Adventure Time, was nervous. The network had been pushing for shows with clear lessons of the day, the kind of moral wrap-up at the end of every episode where the character explicitly states what they learned. Adam Muto talked about this directly in a 2025 interview about the history of Cartoon Network. He said the network kept asking the team to make every episode have a lesson. The team pushed back. They could not have Finn forget what he learned the previous episode, Muto said, because that would not feel right. So the show, slowly and a little against the network's wishes, started to become serialized. Characters started to remember things. Events started to carry over. What started as resistance to a network note ended up becoming one of the show's defining strengths. The fact that things in Ooo had consequences, that Finn carried his past with him, that the world had a memory. The whole engine of how Adventure Time became deep can be summed up in this combination of choices. A storyboard-driven production model that put authority in the hands of dozens of young artists. A creator who, instead of clinging to control, kept stepping back and letting his team make the show whatever they wanted it to be. A network that wanted clean lessons and got, instead, a show that built a 1,000-year mythology in spite of them. A studio culture where the next show was always being grown inside the current show. Where Steven Universe was being dreamed of in the same building where Adventure Time was being made. Where every storyboard artist was a future creator in training. The episodes that made people cry, the ones with Simon and Marceline, the ones with the Ice King's notes, the ones with the songs. All of those episodes came out of this system. Each one was an artist or a pair of artists being handed an outline and being trusted to do something with it. Each one was a person in their 20s or 30s working in a small team, deciding to push a little further than the previous episode had pushed. Each one was the system allowing depth to creep in. The show could get weirder than it was allowed to be because nobody at the top was strict enough about what it was supposed to be. The depth, the heaviness, the sadness, the queer canon, the apocalypse running quietly under everything. None of that would have been possible in a show with a different production model. In a normal cartoon, a writer would have flagged it. A producer would have asked for changes. A network executive would have demanded the script soften something. The storyboard-driven system did not give those gatekeepers as many places to stop the work. By the time anyone could have asked for a change, the episode had already been drawn. The artists had already made it. The thing was already on the page, and changing it meant throwing away weeks of work, and so, mostly, the work stayed. This is the production secret behind every famous moment in the show. The big emotional scene people remember exists because two artists in their 20s, working with a one-page outline, decided to put it there. The song people quote from memory exists because Rebecca Sugar wanted to write a song. The reveal that breaks people exists because Tom Herpick and Steve Wolfhard wanted to make the audience feel something that day. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The first time the show used this freedom to make something genuinely heavy, the first time the storyboard system was used to drop a piece of unmistakable adult emotion into the middle of a children's cartoon, came in the third season. The episode aired in December of 2011. It was a holiday special. On the surface, it was a goofy story about Finn and Jake stealing a recipe book from the Ice King's fridge. Underneath it, hidden in the form of a small home video, was a discovery that would change how the audience saw the cackling princess-stealing wizard they had been laughing at for 2.5 seasons. The man inside the wizard was about to be introduced. His name was Simon Petrikov. He used to wear glasses. He used to be in love. And the show, finally, was about to tell anyone watching exactly what had happened to him. Section 4. Holly Jolly Secrets and the Day the Ice King Stopped Being a Joke. For the first 2.5 seasons of Adventure Time, the Ice King was a punchline. He was the bad guy who could not really be a bad guy. A skinny old man with blue skin, a long, pointy nose, a wild white beard, a gold crown that gave him ice powers, and one consistent obsession that made up the whole shape of his character. He kidnapped princesses. That was his thing. He kidnapped princesses, and he wanted to marry them, and he was very bad at all of it. it. Every time he showed up, Finn and Jake would beat him, save the princess, and go home. The Ice King would fly off in the wind, cackling about how he would get them next time, and the audience would laugh, because it was funny watching this sad old wizard fail at the only thing he ever tried to do. He was voiced by Tom Kenny, who was also the voice of SpongeBob SquarePants. The performance was big and theatrical, and a little pathetic on purpose. The Ice King's voice cracked when he got excited. He whined when he got hurt. He had a pet penguin named Gunter, who he loved in a strange, possessive way. He had a tendency to talk to himself. He occasionally got jealous of Finn and Jake's friendship and tried to insert himself into it, which never worked. None of it added up to a character anyone needed to take seriously. He was a recurring villain in a children's cartoon, and the audience was conditioned to laugh at him every time he appeared. This is the version of the Ice King that everyone watching the show knew for 2.5 years. 45 episodes, 2 seasons of television, and most of a third. 45 episodes of a man who, if anyone had bothered to ask the question, was clearly suffering, was clearly alone, was clearly something more than the joke he kept being treated as. But nobody asked. The show did not ask either. The show was happy to use him as a goof, the way every cartoon since the beginning of cartoons has had a recurring villain who exists mainly to be defeated. And then, on December 5th, 2011, the 3rd season aired an episode called Holly Jolly Secrets, Part 1. The next night, December 6th, it aired Part 2. The 2 parts together formed a single 44-minute story, longer than a normal Adventure Time episode, framed as a special holiday event. On the surface, the plot was nothing. Finn and Jake find a strange tape collection in the Ice King's house. They steal the tapes. They sit down to watch them, expecting to find something embarrassing they can use to make fun of him. The setup is the kind of premise the show had been running for years. Goof on the Ice King. Have some fun. The audience, including the children watching at home, sat down to watch the tapes alongside Finn and Jake. And then the show, very quietly, did something it had never done before. The first tape played. A man appeared on screen. He was wearing glasses. He had a normal human face. He was sitting in what looked like a perfectly ordinary apartment, with bookshelves and a desk and a window with daylight coming through it. He spoke directly into the camera. His voice was warm and a little awkward. The voice of someone making a video diary because they had been told it might be a good idea. The voice of a man who had no idea anyone other than himself would ever watch the recording. His name was Simon Petrikov. He was, the tape said, an antiquarian. He bought and sold old objects for a living, and he had recently come into possession of a strange-looking gold crown, which he had purchased from a sailor in Scandinavia. The crown looked old. He could not quite place where it was from. He decided he was going to study it. He decided he was going to record his findings, on tape, day by day, so that he could keep track of what he learned. The audience watched the tape with Finn and Jake, the same way you watch a home movie of a stranger. There was no music telling anyone how to feel yet. The lighting was warm. Simon was nervous in front of the camera, the way real people are nervous in front of cameras. He was kind. He smiled a lot. He looked, for all the world, like a regular human man living a regular life in a regular city. Then he put the crown on his head, and the tapes kept going, and the apartment got darker, and his skin started to look strange, and his hair started to grow longer, and his fiancée, a woman named Betty, started to look worried. Betty was real. Betty existed. The man who would become the Ice King had been engaged to a real woman with a real name, and she was watching him change in front of her, on tape. And Simon kept making the videos because he was an academic, and he was trying to document what was happening. And the audience watching this in 2011, sitting on couches in living rooms across the country, slowly realized what they were being shown. The Ice King was a person. The Ice King had been a person. The crown they had been laughing at for 2.5 seasons was killing the man underneath it. Every time he had cackled, every time he had kidnapped a princess, every time he had talked to himself or tried to befriend Finn and Jake or wandered alone through the snow, he had been a man with no memory of who he used to be, doing what was left of what he could still do. Betty appeared on the final tape. She had come back to him after they had broken up over what the crown was doing to him, and she was sitting next to him, and Simon was speaking directly to a future version of himself, in case he ever watched the tapes again and could no longer remember her. He told the future Simon that this was Betty, that she had returned, that she loved him. He pleaded with whoever the man in the future would be to remember her name, to remember her face, to remember that someone had loved him before whatever was about to happen happened. And then the tape ended. The screen went black. Finn and Jake sat in silence in the Ice King's living room, holding the tapes they had stolen to make fun of him. The Ice King came home and found them watching. He did not understand what they were doing. He had no memory of the tapes. He had no memory of Simon. He had no memory of Betty. He saw Finn and Jake sitting there with sad faces and asked, in his confused old wizard voice, if they wanted to stay for hot cocoa. This was the moment. This was the moment the show changed forever. There is a thing that happens when a piece of art makes a choice this big, and the thing is that it cannot be taken back. The show could not pretend in subsequent episodes that the audience did not now know who the Ice King used to be. Every time he showed up after Holly Jolly Secrets, He was carrying Simon Petrikov inside of him, whether he knew it or not. Every cackle now had a man underneath it. Every princess kidnapping was a sick man searching for the woman he could not remember. Every weird little behavior, his loneliness, his desperation to be loved, his inability to understand why people did not want to be around him, was now visible as the symptom of something specific. He was not a villain, he was a casualty. The audience now had to hold 2 readings of every Ice King scene for the rest of the series. The buffoon and the man. The villain and the victim. The cackle and the cry for help. The show never went back to using him purely as a joke. It could not. The choice it had made in those 44 minutes had locked something in. What is remarkable about Holly Jolly Secrets, looking back at it now, is how restrained it is. The show could have made this reveal much louder than it did. It could have had a big emotional speech. It could have had a flashback with sweeping music and slow-motion shots. It could have had Finn break down crying. It could have done any of the things that other shows do when they want to make sure the audience knows that something important just happened. Instead, the show did the smallest possible version of the reveal. It just played the tapes. It just let Simon talk to his camera. It just let the audience watch a normal man slowly stop being normal, and then it ended the episode with a confused old wizard offering hot cocoa. There was no announcement that this was a turning point. There was no explanation. The show trusted the audience to feel what they felt, and to carry that feeling into the next episode without being told what to do with it. The other thing the show did, which was even quieter, was that it gave the Ice King an explanation that mapped almost perfectly onto a real disease. The crown protected Simon from death. It also slowly destroyed his mind. The longer he wore it, the more of himself he lost. He knew this was happening. He documented it. He left notes for his future self, hoping that some part of who he had been might survive in writing, even after his memory was gone. He kept wearing the crown anyway, because he had a child to protect, and the crown was the only thing keeping them both alive. What this describes, and what audiences and critics began noticing almost immediately, is dementia. The Ice King has dementia. The show, in the most carefully constructed allegory it would ever build, gave its bumbling cartoon villain the symptoms of one of the most painful diseases that humans actually face. He forgets the people he loved. He says the same things over and over because he cannot remember saying them the first time. He has moments of clarity that pass quickly. He becomes obsessed with substitutes for the love he can no longer remember. The princesses he keeps kidnapping are stand-ins for Betty, the woman whose name and face have been taken from him by the very thing keeping him alive. His behavior, which had been read as villainy, was now visible as the desperate confusion of someone whose mind was no longer his. The novelist Lev Grossman, in a 2013 interview on NPR's Morning Edition, said something about the show that captured what Holly Jolly Secrets had unlocked. He said his father was going through Alzheimer's, that his father had forgotten so much about who he used to be, and that when Grossman watched The Ice King, he thought to himself that this cartoon was about his father dying. Mental Health America has cited the later Ice King episodes as a teaching tool for helping children understand what it is like to live with a mental health condition. This was now what the show was doing. This was what the storyboard-driven system had quietly grown into. Adventure Time, which had started as a cartoon about a boy and his dog hitting things with a sword, had taken its goofiest villain and turned him into one of the most precise depictions of memory loss ever put on television. And the audience, watching at home, had to figure out what to do with that. Children who had been laughing at the Ice King for 2.5 years now had to sit with the discovery that he had been a person all along. Adults watching the show alongside their children had to deal with the same revelation, often more sharply, because some of them had family members going through the same thing the Ice King was going through. The episode did not announce itself as important. It did not tell anyone how to feel. It just left the new information sitting there, in the laps of everyone watching, and let them figure it out. The show's whole future was decided in those 44 minutes. Every great Ice King episode that came later, every scene of him making notes he could not remember writing, every moment of him recognizing Marceline for a flicker before the recognition slipped away again, every song where the man underneath the wizard came briefly to the surface, all of it was made possible by Holly Jolly Secrets. The reveal was the foundation. Everything else was the building. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The audience also did not yet know who the little girl in some of the tapes was. Simon had mentioned her in passing. He had said her name once or twice. There was a flash of black hair, a small figure in the background of one of the recordings. The show had not yet told anyone that the Ice King, before he was the Ice King, had taken in an orphan after the world ended. The show had not yet told anyone that this orphan had grown up. The show had not yet told anyone that she was already a character the audience had been watching for years, and that she remembered everything Simon had forgotten. Her name was Marceline, and her own episode about Simon was waiting in the next season, and it was going to break the audience even more carefully than this one had. Section 5. I Remember You. Cartoon as Document of Dementia. The episode aired on October 15th, 2012. It was the 25th episode of the 4th season. It was 11 minutes minutes long, the standard length for an Adventure Time episode, the same length as a story about a magical cake or a fight with a giant. The episode was called I Remember You. It was written and storyboarded by Cole Sanchez and Rebecca Sugar. And in those 11 minutes, the show did something that, almost 10 years later, people are still trying to figure out how to talk about. The setup is small.
The Ice King has decided he wants to write a sad song. He has heard somewhere that women are attracted to men with tragic backstories, and he has decided that he should have one. He does not have one as far as he knows. So he has gone to find Marceline, who is a musician, who is also a vampire, who is also 1,000 years old, who is also someone he keeps showing up to bother for reasons he cannot quite articulate. He arrives at her house carrying a stack of papers. He says he needs her help. He wants to write the saddest song anyone has ever heard, and he wants to use her as his collaborator, because in his mind, she is cool, and she is good at music, and she will know how to make this work. Marceline is annoyed. She tells him to leave. He does not leave. He pushes the papers at her and asks her to look at them, because, in his words, they are inspiration he has collected over the years. Notes, old letters, a newspaper clipping, things he has saved. She takes the papers. She starts reading them, and the audience, watching this in 2012, slowly realizes what the papers are. The papers are notes that Simon Petrikov wrote to himself hundreds of years ago, when he was still mostly Simon and only a little bit Ice King. The notes are addressed to a future version of himself. They are addressed to whoever he would eventually become, to the man who would no longer remember writing them. They are pleas. They are warnings. They are a man trying to leave a piece of his real self behind so that, when the disease was finished doing its work, something would remain. One of the notes is about Marceline. It is about a little girl Simon adopted after the apocalypse, when he was already starting to lose pieces of himself, but still had enough of his mind left to take care of her. He raised her. He fed her. He sang her songs. He kept her safe from the things that walked through the ruined cities of the post-war world. He wrote down what he was doing because he was already starting to forget, and he wanted there to be a record of what he had done and who he had loved, in case the future version of him ever wondered. The note ends with him telling Marceline, on paper, that he is sorry for whatever he might do when he no longer remembers her. He is apologizing in advance for the man he is about to become. The man holding the note in front of her right now, the cackling wizard who came over to write a song about being lonely, is exactly the man Simon was apologizing for. Marceline reads the note. Her face changes. The Ice King, sitting next to her, does not understand why. He says the words on the paper are good. He says they will make a great sad song. He has no memory of writing them. He has no idea who Marceline used to be to him. He has no idea who he used to be to her. He sees a woman holding a piece of paper with some sad lyrics on it, and he thinks, in the way he is still able to think, that this is a great development for his songwriting project. Marceline starts to sing. She turns the notes into a song. The melody is gentle. The Ice King, delighted, plays along on his keyboard. She sings the lyrics that Simon wrote in Simon's voice, about Simon's own slow disappearance. The lines include phrases like, Marceline, please forgive me for whatever I do when I don't remember you. I am losing myself, and I am afraid you are going to lose me too. I am sorry. The Ice King, sitting at his keyboard next to her, hears the song. He thinks it is beautiful. He compliments her work. He has no idea what he is hearing. Marceline keeps singing. The song builds. The Ice King keeps playing. He starts to get into it. He starts to feel the song the way a musician feels a good song, even though he does not know what it is about. There is a moment near the end where he looks up at her and his face flickers, and for 1/2 second something very close to recognition crosses his eyes. He almost remembers. He almost knows. And then the moment passes, and he does not. And the song ends, and he asks if it was good. Marceline tells him it was. He thanks her. He gathers up his papers. He flies away through the open window of her house, off into the night, back to wherever he came from, back to the life of an old wizard who lives alone with a penguin and does not understand why nobody loves him. Marceline stands in her room. Finn and Jake, who have been watching the whole thing, stand silently in the corner. The episode ends. There is no big speech. There is no funeral. There is no explanation. The episode ends. This is, by general agreement among critics and fans, one of the best episodes of television ever made about dementia. Not one of the best animated episodes. Not one of the best children's episodes. One of the best in any format, of any length, on any subject that has ever tried to portray what it is like to lose someone whose body is still present. The novelist Lev Grossman, on NPR in 2013, said that watching the episode while his father had Alzheimer's felt to him like the cartoon was about his father dying. Mental Health America has pointed to this episode specifically as a tool for helping children understand what mental health conditions are and how empathy can help. The episode has been discussed in academic essays and dementia caregiver forums and personal blog posts written by people who lost their parents and grandparents to memory loss and saw, in 11 minutes of cartoon, something that hours of serious adult drama had never quite managed to capture. The reason it works, the actual mechanism that makes it land the way it does, is worth slowing down for. The first thing the episode does is something
something that almost no other cartoon would have done. It refuses to let either of the two characters be the audience's emotional guide. In a normal episode about something this heavy, the show would pick one character to feel the weight of the situation and show the audience how to feel by following that character. Marceline, in this case, is the obvious choice. She is the one who knows. She is the one who lost Simon. She is the one reading the notes. The episode could have spent its 11 minutes on her face, on her tears, on her processing. The audience could have cried with her. That would have been the easy version. The episode does not do that. It splits its attention. It gives almost exactly equal weight to Marceline, who is suffering, and to the Ice King, who is not. The Ice King does not know what is happening. He does not know he is the cause of the suffering in the room. He does not know the song is about him. He is having a perfectly nice time. He thinks the songwriting session is going well. He compliments his collaborator on her good work. He flies home, pleased. What this does to the audience is a very specific kind of damage. Watching someone grieve openly is sad. Watching someone grieve for a person who is sitting right next to them, oblivious, asking when the next chorus is something else. The audience feels both at once. The audience feels Marceline's grief, and the audience feels the awful, gentle absence in the Ice King. And the gap between those two things is where the real weight of the episode lives. There is no way to feel only one of them. The show makes you feel both. The second thing the episode does is even smaller and possibly even more important. It refuses to let the Ice King be a tragic figure to himself.
Most stories about dementia, when told from the inside, want to give the person with the disease moments of clarity. The patient suddenly remembers. The patient breaks through the fog. The patient looks at their loved one and says their name, and the audience cries, and the moment is presented as a kind of grace. This is how dementia is usually written into fiction, because it gives the audience something to hold on to, a sense that the person is still in there, somewhere, fighting their way out. I Remember You does not give anyone that moment. The Ice King flickers for half a second near the end of the song. He almost gets there. He almost remembers, and then he does not, and the moment passes. And the show does not give the audience the resolution of a clear breakthrough. It just lets him be what he is, which is a man who is mostly gone. The episode trusts the audience to handle this. It trusts them to sit with the truth that not every dementia story ends in a moment of clarity. Some of them just end. Some of them just keep going, with the person you loved smiling at you and not knowing why. This is, for anyone who has actually been around the disease, almost unbearably accurate. Real dementia rarely gives families clean moments. Real dementia is mostly the absence of those moments. The Ice King, in this episode, is what dementia actually looks like. Not the movie version. Not the version that gives the family a tearful goodbye. The real version, where the loved one is having a perfectly fine day, and you are the only one in the room who knows what has been lost. There is a third thing the episode does, and this one is structural in a way that requires looking at the whole show. The Ice King, for the previous 3.5 seasons, had been a joke. He had been the bumbling villain, the pathetic kidnapper, the punchline who showed up every few episodes to be defeated. The audience had laughed at him for years. Holly Jolly Secrets, in Season 3, had complicated this. The audience now knew he had been Simon, but Holly Jolly Secrets had been told from the outside, through tapes that Finn and Jake watched. The audience had learned about Simon as observers, the way you learn about a stranger. I Remember You is the first episode that asks the audience to feel something for him directly. It puts him in the room with someone who knew him before, and it makes the audience watch him fail to recognize her, and it makes the audience feel the loss in real time. After this episode, every joke the Ice King had ever made now had a new layer underneath it. Every cackle was a man trying to be the person he could no longer remember being. Every princess kidnapping was a search for someone whose name had been taken from him. Every weird little behavior was a symptom of the slow disease that had eaten the man inside. The episode rewrote the whole show backwards. Every Ice King scene from the previous 3.5 seasons now had to be reread. Every laugh the audience had ever had at his expense now had to be examined. The show, in 11 minutes, made its audience feel guilty for finding a sick man funny, and then, in the same 11 minutes, told them that it was okay, that he had wanted to be loved, that the version of him underneath the wizard had spent the last of his real mind writing notes to make sure someone, somewhere, eventually understood. What I Remember You really did, in the end, was prove that a children's cartoon could do something serious adult drama mostly fails at. Most adult shows about memory loss are too afraid to be quiet. They want big monologues. They want emotional speeches. They want the dying person to say the meaningful thing before they go. I Remember You has none of that. It has a sick man playing keyboard and complimenting a woman on her songwriting. It has a 1,000-year-old vampire reading a letter that was written for her by a man who no longer knows she exists. It has a half-second flicker of recognition that does not become a recognition. It has an open window. It has the wizard flying home through the night, satisfied with his day. And it has a girl standing alone in her house, holding a stack of papers, holding all the memory of a man who can no longer hold any of it himself. This is what Adventure Time, by the 4th season, had become capable of. This is what the storyboard-driven system, the post-apocalyptic foundation, the slow accumulation accumulation of trust between the show and its audience had grown into. A children's cartoon, 11 minutes long, that critics, doctors, novelists, and grieving children of dying parents had all independently decided was one of the most accurate things ever made about what it is like to lose someone slowly. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Marceline, after the Ice King flies away, is left alone with the notes. She is the one who carries the memory now. She is the one who knew him before. She has been carrying that memory, the show would soon reveal, for almost 1,000 years, alone, while the world around her changed and rebuilt and forgot what it used to be. She is the one who remembers Simon. She is also the one who remembers everything else. The war, the city before it ended, her mother, her childhood, the whole century she lived through and the centuries after. To understand what she carries, the show would have to go back further than it had ever gone. It would have to show what she had survived. It would have to follow her all the way back to the very first day she met the man whose mind she was now slowly losing for the second time. Section 6. Marceline and the Long Memory. How immortality became the show's lens for grief. Marceline the Vampire Queen first showed up in the third episode of the second season. The episode aired on April 11th, 2010. It was called Evicted. The premise was simple. A vampire kicks Finn and Jake out of their treehouse. Finn and Jake try to get the treehouse back. The vampire is mean. The vampire is also, it turns out, sort of cool. The vampire has a bass guitar. The vampire has good taste in music. The vampire likes messing with people, mostly because she finds them boring and finds messing with them entertaining. By the end of the episode, the vampire and the boys have come to a kind of truce. She lets them have their treehouse back. She drifts off into the night. That was the introduction. That was the whole of who Marceline was in the beginning. She was the show's spooky character, the one Pendleton Ward had added to the Second Pitch Bible, specifically because he thought the show needed a way to be a little scarier when it wanted to be. That is exactly what she did in her first episode. She scared Finn. She scared Jake. She did some vampire things. The audience met her, found her interesting, and moved on. What the audience did not know in 2010, and what the writers themselves probably did not fully know yet, was that this minor recurring character was going to end up doing more emotional work than almost any other character on the show. Marceline, by the end of her run on Adventure Time, would be revealed to be roughly 1,000 years old. She would be revealed to have lived through the apocalypse as a small child. She would be revealed to have been adopted, after the war, by a kind man with glasses who slowly lost his mind to a magical crown. She would be revealed to be, alongside the man who became the Ice King, one of the only people on the entire planet who actually remembered what the world had been like before it ended. Olivia Olson, who voices Marceline, said in an interview around the time of the Stakes miniseries that she had felt herself growing up alongside her character. When the role started, Marceline was simple. The voice was a bit cool, a bit detached, a bit punk. As the show went on and the writers started adding layers, the father issues, the lost stuffed bear, the centuries-old loneliness, the quiet love for the surrogate father who could no longer remember her, Olson said her own performance kept having to grow to keep up. The character was getting older the way a real person gets older, except faster, because the show was uncovering decades of her life every season. The choice to make Marceline 1,000 years old was one of the most consequential decisions Adventure Time ever made. It meant that one of the show's main characters had, by definition, lived through the entire history of the post-apocalyptic world. She had seen the bombs fall. She had seen the survivors crawl out of the rubble. She had seen the old human civilizations slowly forget themselves and the new magical civilizations slowly invent themselves. She had been there for everything. She remembered all of it, and she carried that memory, alone, into a present-day Ooo, where almost nobody else had any context for what she had lived through. This is the lens the show used, more than any other, to teach the audience about grief. Most cartoons that want to talk about loss have to invent a reason for one of their characters to suddenly experience it. Someone's grandmother dies. Someone's pet runs away. The character has a single specific thing to grieve, and the episode is about them grieving it. And then, the episode ends, and the show moves on. Adventure Time did not do this with Marceline. Marceline did not have to suddenly experience loss. She was made of it. Her entire character, from the moment her backstory was revealed, was a study in what it does to a person to outlive everything. The first time the show really opened her up was in an episode called Memory of a Memory in the third season. The episode shows brief flashes of Marceline as a young girl, with blue skin and pointed ears, sitting in the rubble of a destroyed city. There is no narration. There is no explanation. The audience sees her, alone, very small, in a world that had clearly just ended, and the audience has to put it together themselves. She had been there. She had been a child during the war. She had grown up in the ash. The second big opening came in the fourth season, in the episode called I Remember You, which split the audience open. The third came in the fifth season, in an episode called Simon and Marcy, which was Rebecca Sugar's last episode on Adventure Time before she left to make Steven Universe. Simon and Marcy is a flashback episode that shows Simon and a
young Marceline making their way through a destroyed city, hundreds of years before the present-day events of the show. Simon is sick. The crown is starting to take him. He is still mostly himself, but the windows of clarity are getting shorter. Marceline is small. She is sick too. Simon is trying to find chicken soup for her. He keeps singing the theme song to the 1980s sitcom Cheers to himself, over and over, because it is one of the few things from the old world he can still remember, and saying the words out loud helps him hold on to the rest of his mind for a little longer. The episode is gentle and devastating in equal measure. It shows two people, a man and a child, surviving in a world that no longer cared whether they survived. It shows Simon protecting Marceline from monsters. It shows him giving up his last food for her. It shows her looking at him with the absolute trust of a small child, while he is slowly, knowingly losing the ability to be the person she trusts. The audience watching this knows what Marceline does not yet know, that the man taking care of her is going to forget her, that the man she will grow up to love is going to spend the next 1,000 years not knowing she exists. This is what immortality means in Adventure Time. It does not mean strength. It does not mean power. It means being the one who remembers when nobody else does. It means having a longer record of love than anybody around you can possibly understand. It means watching everyone you knew either die or change so completely that they might as well have. Marceline carries the entire backstory of the show inside her, alone, and the show keeps quietly returning to her to remind the audience what it costs to be the only witness left. In 2015, the 7th season aired a miniseries called Stakes. It was 8 episodes long. It was structured as a single story, told across consecutive nights of the week, the way television used to do event programming. The miniseries was entirely about Marceline. The story is about her trying to give up being a vampire with Princess Bubblegum's help, because she has decided after all these centuries that she does not want to live forever anymore. She is tired. She wants to grow old. She wants to die someday the way regular people do, the way her father figure did, the way everyone she ever loved either has or will. The first episode of the miniseries opens with a song. The song is called Everything Stays. It was written by Rebecca Sugar, who had left the show 2 years earlier to make Steven Universe, and had returned briefly to write this single song for Marceline's miniseries. Sugar has said publicly that the song was inspired by a stuffed rabbit she owned as a child. The rabbit had been lost in her garden for 6 months. When she found it again, the white belly had faded to a different shade. The rabbit was the same rabbit. The rabbit was also no longer the same rabbit. Time had passed over it, and the passage of time had left a mark, and the mark could not be undone. The song that came out of this experience is one of the most quoted pieces of writing in the entire show. The lyrics describe the way change works. They describe how things stay the same in their basic shape, while every detail of them slowly shifts. They describe the experience of loving something across a long enough time that the thing has become something else, while still, in some way that cannot be measured, still being the thing you loved. Marceline's mother sings the song to her in the flashback. Her mother, whose name is Elise, was a normal human woman who survived the apocalypse with her young daughter and slowly died of an unnamed illness while raising her in the rubble. The song is the song her mother sang to her to put her to sleep at night, in a destroyed world, before her mother died and left her alone. Marceline carried that song through the centuries. She is now, in the present-day timeline of the show, almost 1,000 years older than she was on the night her mother sang it to her. The song still works. The song still says something true. The song still puts her to sleep. This is the lens Adventure Time used to talk about grief. Not through scenes of crying, not through funerals, not through the kind of loud, obvious mourning that television usually thinks grief looks like. Adventure Time talked about grief through a 1,000-year-old vampire still humming her dead mother's lullaby to herself in the dark, because the song was one of the only things from her real life that had survived the apocalypse with her. What Stakes did, across its 8 episodes, was give Marceline the full weight of her own life. The miniseries showed her childhood with her mother. It showed her time with Simon. It showed how she became a vampire, a backstory the show had never explained before. It showed her father, the demon Hunson Abadir, who had failed her in the small, mundane way that fathers fail their children, by eating her fries when she was a kid and then never really apologizing. It showed her in 1,000 different moods, across 1,000 different years, as a small girl, a teenager, a young adult, a vampire queen, and the woman she had become in the present day of the show. It showed her tired. It showed her ready to be done. By the end of the miniseries, Marceline keeps her vampire abilities. She decides that immortality, even with all the loss it has cost her, is hers. She has friends now. She has Bubblegum. She has a present worth being present for. She decides to stay. The decision is not a triumph. It is just a choice she makes, quietly, having looked at the alternative and found that she still had things she wanted to do. What Adventure Time figured out by giving Marceline this whole life is that grief and love are not separate things in a long enough lifetime. They are the same substance. To remember is to grieve. To have loved is to be carrying a loss, no matter how long ago the loss happened, no matter how far away the person is now. Marceline holding the song her mother sang to her is grief. Marceline still showing up to bother father, the Ice King, who is also Simon, who can no longer remember her, is grief. Marceline keeping her old toys, her old home, her old habits, the things from a life nobody else remembers. All of it is grief, and all of it is love, and the two are not separate. The show used Marceline this way for the rest of its run. Every time it needed to talk about something heavy, the passage of time, the loss of a person, the way a place changes when the people who knew it die, Marceline was there. She was the show's long memory. She was the witness. She was the one who could carry a story across centuries because she had been alive for centuries, and the show could trust her to hold the weight of whatever it wanted to put on her. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There was, by this point in the show's run, one more thing Marceline was carrying that the show had been hinting at quietly for years. It was the relationship she had with Princess Bubblegum, the brilliant scientist who ruled the Candy Kingdom, a woman who was also possibly immortal, a woman who Marceline had once been close to and was no longer close to in some way that neither of them fully wanted to talk about. The two of them had a history. The two of them had a shirt that one of them had given to the other and that the other still wore to bed. The two of them had songs they had not finished writing. The two of them had a story that the network running Adventure Time had spent years trying very carefully not to let the show finish telling. Section 7. Bubbleline and the Quiet Insurgency. How Adventure Time made queer love canon inside a network that tried to stop it. The story of Marceline and Princess Bubblegum is, on the surface, a love story that takes 7 years to fully appear on screen. The two characters meet in the second season. They share their first canonical kiss in the series finale in 2018. Between those 2 points, across about 200 episodes of television, the show spends a long time circling something it is not allowed to say out loud, and then a longer time saying it in pieces, and then, finally, in the last possible moment, saying all of it. The story underneath that surface, the story of how those scenes actually got made, is one of the most quietly important fights in the history of children's animation. It is a fight that happened mostly out of view of the audience. It happened in storyboard rooms, in network meetings, in the firing of a young animator from a marketing job, in the resignation of a writer who left the show to make her own. It is the story of how a small group of people pushed against a network that did not want them to push, and how they kept pushing anyway, episode by episode, and how the show eventually got to put on screen the thing it had been trying to put on screen since 2011. Princess Bubblegum first appeared in the very first episode. She was, at the start, the princess Finn had a crush on. She was the show's nominal love interest for its hero, the way a princess in a kid's adventure show is generally a love interest for the hero. She was also, very quickly, more than that. The writers gave her brains. They made her a scientist. They made her the ruler of the Candy Kingdom. They gave her a job that was actually difficult, and a personality that did not entirely work for the role of damsel. By the end of the first season, she was already something more interesting than the show had originally signed her up to be. Marceline arrived in the second season, and was at first set up as the show's spooky character. The two of them did not interact much in those early years. They existed in different parts of the world of Ooh, on different episodes with different storylines. That changed in September of 2011. The third season aired an episode called What Was Missing. The episode was written and storyboarded by Rebecca Sugar and Adam Muto. The plot involved a group of characters trying to recover items that had been stolen from them by a magical door that would only open if they sang a song that came from the heart. Bubblegum and Marceline were both part of the group. Marceline sang a song. The song was called I'm Just Your Problem. The lyrics were directed at Bubblegum. The lyrics included lines about feeling left behind, about being treated like a problem, about wanting to be in someone's life and being pushed out of it. The song was, on its surface, a story about two people who used to be close and were no longer close. The song was, just slightly underneath that surface, very obviously about something more than friendship. The way Marceline sang it, the way she looked at Bubblegum while she sang it, the way Bubblegum reacted, with her face shifting in the small ways the show used when it wanted to communicate that something was hitting a character harder than they wanted to admit. The whole sequence was the kind of thing that the audience watching closely would not be able to misread. There was also, woven into the episode, a small additional detail. Bubblegum was wearing a t-shirt. The t-shirt had a band logo on it. The shirt did not match the rest of her outfit. It looked, very specifically, like it belonged to someone else. Later in the episode, it became clear that the shirt had been a gift from Marceline. Bubblegum had kept it. She wore it when nobody else was looking. The audience picked up on all of this immediately. The internet, in 2011, was a different place than it is now. Forums lit up. Tumblr lit up. Long fan discussions began appearing about whether the show had just done what it looked like it had just done. The fan name for the pairing, Bubbleline, made by combining the two character names, started being used in earnest within days. What happened next is the part that does not usually get told in fan summaries. Frederator, the small studio that had originally helped produce the Adventure Time pilot, ran a promotional video series called Mathematical. The series put out short recap videos for each episode. The mathematical recap for What Was Missing was made by a man named Dan Dan Rickmers. The recap focused on the romantic subtext between Marceline and Bubblegum. It pointed out the song. It pointed out the shirt. It treated the romantic reading as the obvious one, because the romantic reading was the obvious one. The recap was pulled from YouTube and from Frederator's website. Dan Rickmers was fired from Frederator Studios. The official reason was a matter of internal disagreement. The unofficial understanding within the fan community was that Cartoon Network had not been comfortable with the public framing of the relationship as romantic, and the recap had crossed a line that the network was trying to keep invisible. Some fans donated to Rickmers' personal projects after the firing as a way of supporting him. Some accused Cartoon Network of trying to suppress the reading. The episode itself remained in the show. The shirt and the song stayed canon.
But it was now clear to anyone paying attention that the people running the show and the people running the network were not in agreement about what the show was allowed to say. What happened next was a kind of slow institutional silence. After What Was Missing aired in September 2011, the show did not put Marceline and Bubblegum in another episode together for almost 2 years. Fans started calling this period the Great Bubble-Line Drought. The two characters existed in the same world. They had clearly known each other for centuries. The show kept finding reasons to not put them in the same room. The next episode that paired them came in July 2013. It was called Sky Witch. By this point, Rebecca Sugar, who had been the most outspoken champion of the relationship within the show's writing team, had left Adventure Time to create Steven Universe, the Cartoon Network show that would go on to feature explicit same-sex relationships in a way that no major American children's cartoon had done before. Sugar later said that her work on Adventure Time, including her work on Bubbline, had directly inspired the kind of representation she pushed for on her own show. The fact that she got to make Steven Universe at all was, in some real way, a continuation of the fight she had started inside Adventure Time. Sky Witch did its own quiet thing. The episode follows Bubblegum and Marceline going on a mission together. The story turns on Bubblegum's willingness to give up something extremely valuable in order to recover Marceline's old stuffed bear, which has been stolen. The valuable thing Bubblegum gives up is, of course, the t-shirt. The shirt that Marceline had given her years before. The shirt she had kept. The shirt she had been wearing to bed. Bubblegum hands it over because, the show implies, the shirt has become valuable specifically because of how much sentimental weight she has put on it. And that weight is what makes it useful to the witch she is trading with. The audience now knew, definitively, that Bubblegum had been sentimental about the shirt, that the shirt mattered to her, that it had mattered for years. This was how the show kept doing it, not through declarations, through objects, through songs, through small visual choices that the storyboard artists could slip past the network because the network could not quite point at any single moment and say, that one, take that one out. Was the song about love? Maybe it was about friendship. Was the shirt a romantic keepsake? Maybe it was a friendly keepsake. The show was being careful. It was telling the audience the truth in a way that the audience could read clearly while leaving the network with no specific scene to demand the show remove. In January 2016, an episode called Varmints aired. The episode was written and storyboarded by Hannah K. Nystrom, Sam Alden, Graham Falk, and Alex Senwald. It put Marceline and Bubblegum on a mission together, with Bubblegum freshly removed from her position as ruler of the Candy Kingdom and clearly emotionally raw. Over the course of the episode, they argue. They make up. Bubblegum, near the end, falls asleep leaning against Marceline. They blush at each other. The episode treats them, for the first time, with the visual grammar a cartoon usually reserves for two people who are at minimum drifting toward romance. The blushes were storyboarded deliberately. The leaning was deliberate. None of it was accidental. In 2017, the Islands miniseries showed Marceline calling Bubblegum on a long-distance device, while Finn and Jake were away on their journey, which suggested, again without saying it, that they were in regular contact in a way that close friends are not always in regular contact. In 2018, an episode called Bonnabelle Bubblegum showed Bubblegum's full backstory, including her childhood, including the formation of the Candy Kingdom, and made clear that Marceline had been part of her life for almost as long as the kingdom had existed. By the time the series finale was being produced, the show had spent 7 years building towards something that the network had spent 7 years trying not to let it say. The finale was a 44-minute special called Come Along With Me. It was written across multiple drafts by a team led by showrunner Adam Muto. In the climactic sequence, with Ooh under threat from a giant deity called Golb, Marceline and Bubblegum are separated. Marceline thinks Bubblegum is dead. She finds her again. The two of them have a moment. The original outline for the moment, which Muto has spoken about in interviews, contained one phrase. The phrase said, simply, that the two of them have a moment. That was the whole instruction. The storyboard artist Hannah K. Nystrom was the one who got to decide what the moment was. There was a margin note next to the instruction, written by someone on the team. The margin note said, with a large exclamation point, the words, "Come on." The words were a kind of plea, a kind of permission. The words were saying, after 7 years, finally, do it. Nystrom did it. She storyboarded a kiss. The kiss made it into the episode. It aired on September 3rd, 2018, on Cartoon Network, on a Monday night in the final hour of a show that had been
been running for 8 years. The kiss was real. The kiss was on screen. The kiss was watched live by a smaller audience than the show had once had at its peak, but the screenshots traveled fast. The internet, again, lit up. The fans who had been waiting since What Was Missing in 2011 finally got the confirmation that what they had been seeing was what they had been seeing. The show had been telling the truth. They had been right. Showrunner Adam Mudo, in an interview with the website Polygon shortly after the finale aired, talked about the kiss in the most understated way possible. He said the relationship was important. He said, when it showed up in the storyboards, that it made sense. He said more or less that the goal was to do it enough that it would not need to be a new story anymore. That one day, a queer relationship in a children's show would just be something that happens. He talked about it the way you talk about something you have been working toward for a long time and do not want to draw attention to in the wrong way. The reason the kiss was historic is not just because it happened. It is because of how it happened. It happened through years of small decisions made by writers and storyboard artists working inside a system that was actively trying to slow them down. It happened through the firing of a recap producer in 2011. It happened through the 2-year silence between What Was Missing and Skywitch. It happened through Rebecca Sugar leaving the show to make Steven Universe, where she could push further and faster. It happened through the slow, careful, deliberate accumulation of evidence. The shirt, the songs, the blushes, the leaning, the calls, all of it placed on screen under the noses of people who were nervously hoping the show would not do exactly the thing it ended up doing. The audience that grew up with Adventure Time absorbed this. Children who watched the show in 2011, who saw Marceline sing about being just someone's problem, grew into teenagers who saw Skywitch, who saw Varmints, who saw The Kiss in 2018. For a generation of queer kids, the relationship between Marceline and Bubblegum was the first time they saw a love like the one they were starting to recognize in themselves, shown on screen, slowly, over years, treated with the same patience and care that any other long-term relationship in any other show was treated with. The fight to make Bubbline canon was won episode by episode, against pushback, against silence, against the fear of network executives in offices that no fan ever got to see. The depth of Adventure Time, in this case, is not just emotional depth, it is institutional depth. It is the depth of what it actually takes to make a piece of art that says something true inside a system that does not want it said. The show kept saying it anyway, quietly, until it was finally allowed to say it loudly, and then it said it loudly, and then it ended. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. While all of this was happening in the background, in the small, invisible fights between writers and executives, the foreground of the show was doing its own slow work. The boy at the center of Adventure Time, the human child Finn, had been 12 years old when the show started in 2010. He was now, in the final seasons, almost an adult. He had been in love. He had been heartbroken. He had lost an arm. He had met his father. He had grown up. The show, against every cartoon convention that had come before it, had let him. Section 8. Finn grew up, and the show grew up with him. There is a quiet rule about cartoons that most people never notice they are aware of, and the rule is this: cartoon characters do not age. Bart Simpson has been 10 years old since 1989. SpongeBob has been working at the Krusty Krab for over 25 years, and has never been promoted, never gotten older, never had to deal with the fact that he is an adult. The kids on South Park are 8 or 9, and they have been 8 or 9 since 1997. The whole industry runs on the unspoken understanding that animated characters exist outside of time, that they live in a kind of permanent now, that the audience comes to them and ages around them while they stay where they are. This is convenient for the shows. It lets them run forever. It lets new audiences discover them at any age. It also means the characters never have to do the one thing real people are required to do, which is grow up. Adventure Time, almost alone among major animated shows of its era, broke this rule. Finn started the show as a 12-year-old. He ended the show 8 years later as a 17-year-old. The show let its main character age in real time alongside its audience. Children who started watching Adventure Time at 12 in 2010 finished it at 20 in 2018. Finn was 12 in 2010 and almost an adult by the finale. The two of them grew up together. The whole architecture of how the show changed across its run is shaped around this single decision. Composer Tim Kiefer, in interviews after the show ended, said that Adventure Time gradually became an exploration of the hero's journey through Finn. The show was not planned to be that. The show was originally planned to be a goofy adventure cartoon about a boy and his dog. But once the writers figured out that Finn was going to age, that he was actually going to grow, the show started building itself around what that meant. A 12-year-old hero is one kind of story. A 14-year-old hero is a different story. A 17-year-old hero is a different story again. The show, by allowing its hero to actually pass through these stages, was forced to keep finding new things to be about. In Season 1, Finn is 12. His personality is roughly what you would expect from a 12-year-old hero in an adventure cartoon. He He is enthusiastic. He is loud. He believes in good and bad as if those words have clean definitions. He believes in heroes. He wants to be one. He wants to save princesses, slay monsters, find treasure, and come home in time for dinner. His view of the world is binary. There are good guys and there are bad guys. He fights the bad guys. The good guys are his friends. Pendleton Ward in interviews has said that he wrote Adventure Time partly as if he were running a session of Dungeons & Dragons, the tabletop role-playing game. Finn's early motivations are basically those of a player at a D&D table. Slay monsters, explore dungeons, find loot. Ward has said this directly. In Season 1 this works. The show is about adventures. Finn goes on them. He hits things with a sword. He learns small lessons. He goes home. In Season 2, things start to shift. Finn is now 12, turning 13. He starts to notice that not every villain is a villain in the simple way he expected. He develops a complicated crush on Princess Bubblegum, who is much older than he is, and treats him with affection but not romance. He starts to feel things he does not have words for.
The show keeps the adventure structure intact, but the adventures start to have edges. Finn starts to lose at things. He gets confused. He gets disappointed. The world is starting, slowly, to become bigger than the hero's worldview can fit. By Season 3, Finn is 13, turning 14. The episode Holly Jolly Secrets airs. Finn watches the Ice King's tapes and discovers that the man he has been treating as a simple villain is actually a sick old man who used to be a good person. This is the first major adjustment in his understanding of the world. The bad guy is not just a bad guy. The bad guy is also a person. The bad guy is also someone who has lost things. Finn does not know what to do with this information. He sits with it. The show, importantly, does not give him an easy answer. It just lets the new information be there, the same way it lets the audience sit with it. In Season 4, the relationship with Princess Bubblegum becomes officially something Finn cannot have. She tells him, gently and clearly, that she is not interested in him romantically and that the age gap is too big. Finn, for the first time, has to deal with a kind of heartbreak that does not have a villain to defeat. There is no monster to fight. There is just the slow disappointment of wanting something and not being allowed to have it. He moves on. He meets Flame Princess. The show treats his relationship with Flame Princess as the first real relationship of his life. It is messy. It is awkward. He worries about how he smells. He worries about whether she will like him. He worries about kissing her, since she is literally made of fire, and any contact between them physically hurts both of them. The episode Burning Low in Season 4 is built around Finn navigating these worries. The fan writer who first analyzed Finn's developmental arc on Tumblr noted, accurately, that the episode rang true to anyone who had ever been a teenager trying to impress a first girlfriend. The cartoon was doing the actual emotional work of being a teenager, not the joke version, the real version. Then, in the 5th season came the episode Frost and Fire. This is the episode many fans point to as the first time Finn does something genuinely wrong. Finn has been having intense, confusing dreams about Flame Princess fighting the Ice King. The dreams excite him in ways he does not fully understand. To recreate the feeling of the dreams, he manipulates Flame Princess into fighting the Ice King again, by lying to both of them. His plan works. He gets the feeling he wanted. Flame Princess finds out what he has done. She breaks up with him. What is striking about this episode, in the context of the show's whole run, is that the show does not let Finn off the hook. Finn does the wrong thing for selfish reasons. The show shows that he did the wrong thing. The show does not give him a clean path to redemption. The relationship is over. The damage is done. He carries the consequences. This is, again, not how cartoons usually work. Cartoons usually want their hero to be the hero. Adventure Time, for an episode, lets its hero be small, lets him be selfish, lets him fail in a way that has actual costs, and then it makes him live with what he did. Around this time, the show's tone overall starts to shift. The episodes get more ambitious. The plots get longer. The casual one-off adventures of the early seasons start to give way to longer arcs, to reveals that span multiple episodes, to backstories that take seasons to fully unfold. The show is doing this because Finn is doing it. The show is growing up because Finn is growing up. The structure of the cartoon is mirroring the structure of its protagonist's life. As Finn becomes more capable of carrying complicated stories, the show starts giving him more complicated stories to carry. In Season 6, the show starts answering one of the longest-running questions in its run. Who is Finn's father? The answer comes in an episode called Escape from the Citadel, which is part of a 2-part premiere with the previous episode, Wake Up. Finn finds his father. His father is not a hero. His father is a small-time crook named Martin, who has been imprisoned in a multi-dimensional prison for what the show calls a cosmic crime. Finn, who has spent his whole life imagining what his missing father might be like, finally meets him and discovers that the man is not what he hoped. Worse, in the chaos of the prison breakout, Martin abandons Finn again. Finn loses his right arm in the process. This is one of the most striking storytelling choices the show ever made. Finn, the cheerful boy hero, the protagonist of a cartoon about adventures, comes home from
from meeting his father with one fewer arm than he left with. The arm grows back, eventually, and is later replaced with a robot arm built by Princess Bubblegum. But the loss is real. The show does not undo it. Finn is one-armed for a long stretch of the show, and the visual change is unignorable. He is no longer the boy from the first season. He is something else now, something the world has done damage to. What makes this all work, what keeps it from feeling depressing, is that the show never treats Finn's growing up as a tragedy. It treats it as a process. He keeps adventuring. He keeps being kind. He keeps being the person his friends rely on. He just becomes a more complicated version of that person as he gets older, the same way actual people do. The show treats his maturation as natural, as something that was always going to happen. In Season 7, an episode called The Hall of Egress airs. The episode is unusual even by Adventure Time standards. Finn gets stuck in a kind of magical time loop. He cannot see. He has to navigate a world without his eyes for what feels, to him, like a very long time. He has to give up his old way of moving through the world and learn a new one. By the end of the episode, when he finally escapes, he is changed. The episode is widely identified by fans and critics as the formal turning point at which Finn fully becomes a kind of adult version of himself. The Red Brick analysis of Finn's coming-of-age arc names this episode as the conclusion of the depression he had been moving through in earlier seasons and the beginning of his more mature perspective on the world. In the same general stretch of the show, an episode called Breezy aired. The episode is about Finn dealing with depression. The depression is shown literally as a flower growing out of his body, slowly wilting as he tries to recover from his breakup with Flame Princess. He spends the episode trying to find romance with various other women, hoping that any of it will revive the flower. None of it works the way he wants. By the end of the episode, the flower is gone. The depression is not fully resolved, but the episode marks the moment Finn starts moving through it instead of being trapped by it. Critics, including Oliver Sava of the AV Club, praised the episode for its honest depiction of teenage depression, which is the kind of phrase that does not usually get used about a children's cartoon. By the final seasons, Finn is 17. He has lost his arm and gotten a new one. He has had multiple relationships. He has met his father and accepted that his father is not the man he hoped. He has met his mother briefly in a digital recreation. He has fought monsters and made peace with monsters. He has been a hero and has occasionally been the bad guy and has occasionally been just a confused person trying to figure out what to do. The show has let him be all of these things. The show has not protected him from any of them. What this whole arc does, taken together, is something most cartoons never even try. It tells its young audience that growing up is real, that growing up is a long process, that growing up involves losing things, including pieces of yourself, that growing up means being wrong sometimes and having to live with what you did when you were wrong. That growing up does not mean becoming less yourself. It means becoming more yourself, with more weight, with more memory, with more of the marks the world leaves on a person who actually lives in it. A whole generation of children watched Finn grow up while they were also growing up. That experience is, for many of them, one of the most foundational television experiences of their lives. The show was not, for these viewers, a comfort show that they returned to. The show was a companion. They were 12 when Finn was 12. They were 15 when he was 15. They had their first heartbreaks around the same time he had his. They started to lose their innocence about the world around the same time he started to lose his. The show was not just about the hero's journey. It was a hero's journey that the audience was living alongside, and that the show was wise enough to honor by letting its hero actually go through the journey instead of resetting him every season. This is part of what people mean, even if they cannot always articulate it, when they say Adventure Time is deep. The show grew up. Most cartoons do not. Most cartoons cannot. The choice to let Finn age, the choice to give him an actual arc, the choice to let him have real consequences and real damage and real growth is a choice that turns the entire enterprise of the show into something other than entertainment. It turns it into a kind of long, gentle teaching. The teaching is that growing up is okay. The teaching is that you can lose things and still be yourself. The teaching is that the bad days are part of it, and the good days are part of it, and that the project of being alive is just continuing on through both. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Finn was the show's main character. Finn was the show's hero. Finn was the one whose journey the audience tracked most closely. But Finn was not the character who carried the show's quiet philosophy. The character who carried the philosophy was someone smaller, someone less obviously important. A small green and gray robot who lived in the tree fort with Finn and Jake, who could not always remember whether they had emotions or not, who treated everything that happened with the same gentle curiosity, and who, in the show's strangest and most quietly beautiful moments, kept telling everyone around them that the right way to live was to play. Section 9. BMO and the philosophical heart of the show. Why a toaster robot carries the thesis. In every episode of Adventure Time, in the title sequence, there is a moment where Finn and Jake bump fists, and a small small, green and gray, box-shaped figure appears at the bottom of the screen. The figure has 2 stubby legs, 2 small arms, a screen for a face, and a single, happy expression. The figure is BMO. BMO is a video game console. BMO is also a video player. BMO is also an alarm clock, a flashlight, a toaster, a chef, a detective, a camera, a strobe light, a music player, a roommate, and, occasionally, a soldier with a bow and arrow. BMO is whatever BMO needs to be. The name is a shortened version of the phrase "be more," which the show has confirmed is what the letters actually stand for. The whole character is a small machine whose name is a quiet instruction. BMO lives in the tree fort with Finn and Jake. BMO is technically owned by them, in the way a video game console is owned by the people who bought it, but the show treats BMO as a third member of the household from the very beginning. BMO has a personality. BMO has feelings, even though BMO sometimes claims not to. BMO has friends. BMO has a love interest, named Football, who is BMO's reflection in the mirror. BMO talks to plants and has long internal conversations with imaginary characters. BMO is voiced by Nikki Yang, one of the storyboard artists who came up through Adventure Time's production system, who also plays the character Lady Rainicorn, Jake's wife. For most of the show's run, BMO is treated as a minor character. BMO shows up in the tree fort scenes. BMO occasionally gets a small subplot. BMO is part of the family, but not at the center of the action. The big emotional weight of the show usually goes to Finn, Jake, Marceline, Bubblegum, or the Ice King. BMO sits at the edge of the room, doing BMO things, while the bigger characters carry the bigger stories. This is why what BMO actually represents is so easy to miss. In the 5th season, an episode called Be More aired. The episode is about BMO's origins. BMO's core system drivers have been accidentally deleted, and Finn and Jake have to take BMO to the factory where BMO was made in order to fix things. They sneak into the factory. They evade security. They eventually find the man who built all the MO units, an ancient cyborg named Mo. Mo has lived for hundreds of years thanks to mechanical parts, but he is dying anyway. The MO units he created have mostly broken down or wandered off. BMO is one of the last functioning ones. Mo explains, in a quiet exchange near the end of the episode, what BMO was actually built for. The story is small. He says BMO was created to be a companion. He says he made BMO so that someone, somewhere, would always have a friend to play with. The whole purpose of BMO, the entire reason BMO exists, is to teach humans how to play. This is the line that critics and fans have pointed at as the philosophical core of the entire show. Oliver Sava of the AV Club, in his review of the episode at the time, wrote that the moment offered an interesting insight into the philosophy behind the series. He observed that the childlike mentality of fun and play is treated as an enlightened state in Adventure Time, not as a juvenile or shallow state, and that BMO reaches that state every day, naturally, with Finn and Jake. This observation, once you see it, reframes the entire show. Every episode of Adventure Time is, in some way, a meditation on what it means to play. Finn and Jake are characters who, even as adults around them are dealing with apocalypses and dementia and centuries-old grief, keep choosing to spend their days playing. They have sword fights. They have card game tournaments. They go on quests for the sake of going on quests. They invent new games on Mondays. They build forts. They tell each other stories. They make up songs. The world is heavy, and the response of the show's main characters is, mostly, to play through it. BMO is the patron saint of this response. BMO does not have human concerns. BMO does not have to worry about death or aging or jobs or money. BMO is, by design, a being whose entire purpose is fun. And the show treats this not as a limitation, but as wisdom. BMO is happy. BMO is loved. BMO has a complete and meaningful life. And the way BMO has that life is by approaching every moment with curiosity, with imagination, with the willingness to pretend, with the absolute commitment to taking play seriously. The show keeps pushing this idea further as it goes. In Season 6, an episode called The More You Mo, The Mo You Know, shows BMO experiencing what looks like a kind of existential crisis. BMO talks to other versions of themselves, including a version called Rainbow BMO, who is more philosophical and more troubled. The episode plays with the question of who BMO actually is, and what BMO is for. The answer, again, comes back to play, to being present, to staying engaged with the small, ordinary, daily acts of taking care of the people you love. In 2020, 2 years after the original series ended, Cartoon Network released a special called Adventure Time: Distant Lands, which contained 4 longer episodes set after the finale. The first of these was simply called BMO. The whole episode was about the small robot, alone in space, on a quest to save a colony of strange alien rabbits from a corporate villain. The episode includes a sequence where BMO is torn apart, where BMO is, for a few minutes, effectively dead. The Rainbow BMO from the earlier episode returns and tells BMO, gently, that BMO has now failed in their mission, that BMO BMO's job is now to be dead. What the episode ends up arguing, across its 45 minutes, is that BMO does not die. BMO comes back together. BMO finishes the mission. BMO travels back to Earth. BMO arrives at a tree fort and meets, for the first time, two small figures playing in the front yard. The two figures are a young Finn and a young Jake. The whole episode, it turns out, has been a prequel. It explains how BMO ended up in the tree fort. It explains how BMO came to live with the two friends. And the answer the special spends its full runtime building toward, is that BMO chose them. BMO traveled across space, survived a corporate war, got torn apart and put back together, came home to a planet where humanity had ended, and found two children playing in the dirt outside a treehouse. BMO had been built to teach humans to play. BMO had been built to be a companion. BMO saw two small beings who clearly already knew how to play, and BMO decided, in BMO's quiet way, to stay with them.
This is the show's quiet thesis. The show, when you strip everything else away, when you take out the apocalypse and the dementia and the love stories and the long, lonely centuries, is built on a single argument. The argument is that the world is heavy, and the heaviness is real, and the heaviness will not go away. And the response to the heaviness is not despair. The response is play. The response is staying curious. The response is keeping the part of you that is 12 years old alive, even when the rest of you has had to grow up. The response is building a tree fort with your best friend and inviting your weird vampire neighbor and your robot roommate over to hang out. BMO carries this argument because BMO is the character whose entire being is the argument. BMO does not have to think about it. BMO just does it, every day, as a fact of how BMO exists. While the bigger characters are working through their tragedies, BMO is in the corner of the tree fort, painting their face like a chef and pretending to be a detective. While Marceline is grieving Simon, and Bubblegum is running a kingdom, and Finn is figuring out what kind of man he wants to be. BMO is teaching everyone, by example, that none of this has to crush you. You can carry it. You can also, while carrying it, dance around the kitchen. There is a reason that, when the show wanted to make its biggest argument in the finale, it gave the song to BMO. There is a reason that the song BMO sings in the finale is a calm, gentle lullaby about how the present moment will always have happened, no matter what comes after. BMO is the character the show trusts to deliver its actual philosophy. Not Finn, not Jake, not Marceline, not Bubblegum, not the Ice King, even after he became Simon again. The robot, the toaster, the video game console. The character whose entire reason for existing is to remind the people around them that play is not a waste of time, that fun is not shallow, that imagination is not childish, that the right way to live in a heavy world is to stay light enough inside yourself to keep loving the people who are still there. For an audience growing up alongside the show, BMO is one of the quiet keys to why Adventure Time hits the way it does. The big moments make you cry, the reveals break your heart, but it is BMO sitting in the background of almost every domestic scene, dancing or singing or mispronouncing words or asking innocent questions, who keeps the whole show held together. BMO is the proof that the show is not, at its core, sad. The sadness is real, the sadness is honored, the sadness is given full weight, but the sadness is not the answer. The answer is what BMO does. The answer is whatever you call the thing where you keep showing up, keep making little jokes, keep turning the radio on, keep inviting your friends over, keep playing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. When the show finally ended, when the last episode aired in September 2018, this is the message it chose to carry across the finish line. Not a big speech, not a big goodbye, a song, a small robot singing a lullaby to a tired dog while a war happened around them. The song was about time. The song was about how the moments people share do not stop being real just because the moments end. The song was written by someone who had left the show years before and come back specifically to write this one final piece of music. And the song, when it played, would gather every character on the show into one room, and they would all sing it together. And the show would, finally, be ready to say the thing it had been trying to say from the very first iceberg in the very first season. Section 10, Time Adventure and the finale that argued for itself. The series finale of Adventure Time aired on September 3rd, 2018. The episode was called Come Along With Me. It was 44 minutes long, the length of 4 normal Adventure Time episodes stitched together into a single long story. It was the 280th episode of the series. It was the end of an 8-year run of television, and it was structured deliberately as a kind of closing argument. The plot of the finale is small for something so long. The land of Ooo is at war. Princess Bubblegum is fighting her uncle Gumbald, a candy person she had created and then erased and who has now returned for revenge. The war breaks open into something worse when a giant cosmic deity called Golb is accidentally summoned. Golb is the kind of threat the show had been hinting at for years, a creature whose voice causes chaos, whose presence
existence breaks reality, whose existence makes most fights pointless. Everyone in Ooo has to put aside their old conflicts and try to survive together. Inside this big, chaotic battle, the show makes time, somehow, for almost every quiet thing it had spent 8 years setting up. Finn lets go of his anger toward Fern, the corrupted version of himself made of grass, who is dying. Marceline finds Bubblegum after thinking Bubblegum was dead. The two of them have a moment. The original outline simply said, "They have a moment," with a margin note next to it, written by someone on the team, that read, "Come on," with a large exclamation point. Storyboard artist Hannah K. Nystrom was given the latitude to decide what the moment would be. She storyboarded a kiss. The kiss aired. After 7 years of pushing against network caution, the show, on its way out, finally got to do the thing it had been trying to do. And then, in the middle of this enormous battle, with the world ending around them, the show stops. Jake the dog, who has been holding things together for everyone for 8 years, becomes overwhelmed. He sits down. He cannot keep going. BMO walks up to him. BMO has a small, portable keyboard. BMO sits down next to Jake, looks at him gently, and starts to play. The song BMO plays is called Time Adventure. The title is the show's own title with the words swapped. The song was written by Rebecca Sugar, who had left Adventure Time 5 years earlier to make Steven Universe, and had returned, briefly, to write this one final piece of music. Sugar joked at the 2018 San Diego Comic-Con, where the song was first revealed, that she had written it because she could not stay away. The track was produced by the show's composer Tim Kiefer. The song was dedicated to showrunner Adam Mudo. The lyrics of Time Adventure are, on their surface, simple enough that a young child could understand them. They describe time itself. They describe how the present moment, once it has happened, is a permanent thing. The moment is real. The moment is now. And after the moment ends, the moment will always have happened. Nothing can take that away. The lyrics describe this, gently, in the form of a lullaby being sung from one friend to another in the middle of a war. What the song is saying, when you slow down and listen to what it actually says, is the answer the show had been building toward for almost a decade. The answer to the post-apocalypse. The answer to the dementia. The answer to the centuries of grief Marceline had been carrying. The answer to the long, slow loss of Simon Petrikov. The answer is that the things we love do not stop being real when they end. The moments we live in do not vanish when they pass. The people we lose do not become unloved. Time goes forward. The present becomes the past. And the past, having happened, is permanent. Nothing can ever undo a moment that has already been. This is, at its core, what BMO has been telling everyone, just by existing, since the very first season. The right way to live is to be present. The right way to live is to love the people who are with you while they are with you. The right way to live is to play, and to mean it, and to know that the playing was real, even after the playing is over. As BMO sings, Jake calms down. Other characters hear the music. They start to drift toward it. One by one, Princess Bubblegum, Marceline, Lumpy Space Princess, Lemon Grab, Flame Princess, Lady Rainicorn, Huntress Wizard, Slime Princess, Cinnamon Bun, Nepter, the Duke of Nuts, and a long parade of other characters from across the show's run gather around BMO and Jake. They join the song. They harmonize. The song builds. The whole world of Ooo, in the middle of its worst moment, is gathered together singing a lullaby about how the present is forever. The whole finale ends in a way that mirrors the beginning. The opening of the episode and several scenes throughout take place 1,000 years in the future. Two new characters named Shermie and Beth find a rusted old robot arm in the dirt, Finn's old arm, the one Bubblegum had built him after he lost his real one. They take the arm to an old wizard known as the King of Ooo. The wizard turns out, in a quiet reveal, to be BMO. BMO has lived for centuries. BMO has watched Ooo go through more cycles. BMO is now telling the story of Finn and Jake to two new young heroes, who will go on their own adventures. The finale ends with Shermie and Beth bumping fists, exactly the way Finn and Jake did in the title sequence of every episode for 8 years. The shot is the same shot the series began with. The implication is gentle and clear. The story of Adventure Time was one story, told in one specific way, for one specific generation of viewers. The story is now ending. But the kind of story Adventure Time was, the kind of friendship Finn and Jake had, the kind of adventures they went on, will keep happening. New kids will find new versions of it. The cycle continues. The names change. The friendship is permanent. The finale aired to an immediate critical response that was almost universally positive. Eric Kohn of IndieWire called it a salute to the best of the show's journey. Dave Trumbore of Collider called it the kind of finale you always hope for with animated series. Dylan Heisen of Overly Animated called it one of the best series finales in television history. The kiss between Bubblegum and Marceline made global news. The song Time Adventure became, in the years that followed, one of the most quoted pieces of writing the show ever produced. It has shown up at weddings. It has shown up at funerals. People have used the lyrics, about the present moment being forever, in tributes to friends and family they have lost. This is the answer Adventure Time spent 8 years building toward, and the answer it delivered, in song form, in its final hour. The world ends. The people you love are are taken from you. The mind you used to have slips away. The friend who raised you stops being able to remember your name. The country you grew up in is buried under 1,000 years of dirt. All of these things are true. All of these things will happen. And underneath all of them is a simpler thing that does not change. The moment you are in right now, while you are in it, is real. The love you have for the people around you, while you have it, is real. After this moment ends, the moment will always have been real. Nothing erases that. Time moves forward. Time does not undo. A children's cartoon, made by a young man with a goofy idea, picked up by accident, expanded by accident, deepened by accident across 8 years of small choices made by dozens of artists, ended its run by gathering its characters around a small robot playing a keyboard and singing a song about the permanence of love. The show, having started as a pitch about a boy and his dog hitting things with a sword, ended as one of the most quietly philosophical pieces of animation ever made. The depth was not designed. The depth was discovered. And on the night of September 3rd, 2018, the show finally said out loud, in song, what it had been quietly saying since the very first iceberg in the very first season. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.